Let's look at chapter 16 in Rude, but specifically for the lecture I'm going to focus on what she has to say about verbs and at some length on what she has to say about passive voice. Nonetheless, I strongly suggest you read the entire chapter. The discussion of abstract and concrete nouns is very useful, and of course just talking about verbs without reference to how they link up with nouns to become subjects and predicates would make little sense. But let's start by saying something about Rude's notion of convey the action in the sentence accurately. She says build sentences around action verbs. The first sentence in that subsection says readers approach sentences wondering who did what. Well, that's the same version of our who does what to whom, the who does portion, the phrase from our head first editing practice. Note also on the next page where she says choose strong verbs, she offers a good discussion of how verbs like make, give, do, reflect, involve are often used in ways that simply do not convey action. They may be in action verbs such as provide, but they're phrased in ways that take the action out of the verb. The verb phrase will deal with, as in the report will deal with the third phase of the project. It's really a good example. You will find authors with a very limited verb vocabulary, and you have to search through their nouns and turn some of those nouns into verbs to bring action into the document. But let's consider passive voice at greater length. Passive voice has nothing to do with this action verb or passive verb. The action verb here, hit, and that's an action verb, can be either in active or passive voice. This is active and this is passive. So what's the difference? Well, let's understand it grammatically. Up here, boy is the subject and the verb is hit. So it's active voice. The subject performs an action. Boy hit. What I want you to notice is that both versions of this sentence are about the exact same reality. There's a boy, there's a ball, and there's some hitting going on. But sentence number one, the active voice sentence, the first sentence, is a sentence about a boy because boy is in the subject position. In the passive voice transformation, ball is in the subject position and the verb becomes was hit. This is a subject, or excuse me, a sentence about a ball. The reality is exactly the same. But if you mean to tell the story with emphasis on the boy, you use active voice. If you mean to tell the story with emphasis on the ball, you use passive voice. In other words, it's finally a rhetorical choice. It's not a matter of simply reflexively preferring the active voice, which is probably what you were taught at least once or twice somewhere in high school and in English classes, and perhaps even in a 101 or a 102 class. It's not that you should prefer the active voice. You need to find out what the rhetoric calls for, what the rhetorical intent is. Should it be a story about a boy, or should it be a story about a ball? Let's go on to look at some of the effects of passive voice. Passive voice is often advised against because there is research out there. Once again, it's analytically based that shows that readers do recall information better and they verify it faster in documents that predominantly use the active voice, who does kinds of statements. When that same information appears in passive voice, reading times go up and comprehension and usability scores go down. The usability scores is the part I want to mention here. One of these tests would give instructions to two different groups of people, and the instructions would be written in different grammatical transformations. They'd time how long it took to read, then they'd give them a test on it for comprehension, and then they'd actually ask them to perform the task, to use the instructions. Then they'd call them back a week later, give them the same instructions and the same task. Clearly, what they found, without a shadow of a doubt, statistically speaking, is that active voice constructions, people could skim them more quickly, and they also were better at performing the action. That's the part that really convinces me. They were able to act, and remember, in workplace writing, it's transactional writing. Readers read it because there's an action they need to perform. So that's pretty good evidence for the use of active voice. One study, in fact, rewrote samples of scientific and technical reports. They were looking for most comfortable to read, easiest to grasp, simplest to digest. If you want, you can look it up. Here's some of the information on some of these studies that found that direct active voice writing, minimum of specialist vocabulary, mixture of personal and impersonal construction, short and uncomplicated sentences, that these were the ones that readers not only preferred but found were more useful. So what does that tell us? Well, if you compare the active voice version of a sentence that was 3 slides ago, look at this. It has been suggested by research that information that is presented in documents in which the active voice is used is recalled. You can see that if you started doing paramedic method here, you'd be boxing all sorts of is's. They're everywhere. Here's 3 just right here. You'd be circling all kinds of prepositions, and it'd be very hard to tell who does what to whom. Whereas the original sentence was, research suggests that documents written in the active voice. See the difference? As always, don't forget to tell the story. Here's Little Red Riding Hood. One day a girl went for a walk. Here it is in passive voice. One day a wood was walked in by a little girl. This is probably the story of the wood, not the story of the little girl. So there's power in a clear and direct narrative. So you want to reserve use of the passive voice to emphasize the action. The ball was hit. Emphasize the result. Well, that's what happened to the ball. Emphasize the recipient. Well, the ball received the hit. It's more important in the subject position in passive voice. So prefer active voice at the beginning of discussions, when you need to tell a story, and when you conclude with the significance, the so what statement at the end that directs readers what to do with the content you have given them.